Thank you, Skylar. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Instrumental Breakthroughs. Instrumental Breakthroughs are conversations about the psychedelic origin stories of your favorite rock and roll superheroes. I am your host, Daniel Shankin, and this is a production of Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration, a community organization that offers preparation and integration support for people who want to transform deeply using psychedelics all around the world. I would like to thank our co-producers, Brian Markowitz at Deadhead Land, where you can watch our show live, and Skylar and Steve at Livestream Remote. Thank you, gentlemen. I would like to introduce our guest. Emil Amos is not only the drummer of Grails, Lilacs, and Champagne, and the singer and guitarist of Holy Sons, but a true multi-instrumentalist. After a career that stretched over 50 records over the last 20 years on many esteemed underground labels like Drag City, Thrill Jockey, Temporary Residence, Amos brings together all of his signature styles under one record's concept. The vastly different sounds of his four bands are blended into one kaleidoscopic union that plays like a soundtrack to a very lonely and suspicious European suspense film of the 70s. I'm actually now reading a bio for a single album, aren't I?
That's fine. I was just watching. I'm catching up on my European films right now, and going back through all the early Dario Argento. So actually, that's kind of funny to hear that stuff, because I don't know if you had that phase, but European film music has just been a major cornerstone for our bands for 20 years now. So it's relevant.
Right on. A little bit, I was sort of interested in like Wim Wenders, so some of that kind of, a little bit, but not so much the music. Although now I'm starting to get interested in soundtrack music for things like playlists for journeys. It's
Sure.
like, what is, that orchestral stuff is sometimes really, really nice for people who are on mushrooms.
Yeah, actually, you're getting into inadvertently like the guiding force of like my mixing values is like there's particular frequencies, there's particular edges or jagged things that happen in music just naturally. It could be just like a 70s funk song, and when you're high or you're in that zone, there's many things just sound awful, and knowing what you don't want to experience is a major head start over people who are thinking very analytically and are just mixing like they went to mixing school. And so to this day, like one of my greatest advantages is that my experience is so fully dosed that like if I'm listening to something, I know what will please me. So that's cool that might be getting a little bit more trendy in terms of just there's a culture of tripping music in general. Like that, there was always supposed to be that, but I don't think it was necessarily really the real thing. I mean, Pink Floyd themselves, I don't think most of those guys really took that much acid. Like there's a lot of mythology that you have to push aside when you're trying to get into it, So pushing aside the mythology is part of my job. That's what I do on the podcast and things. And coming from that real sort of knowledge base of LSD knowledge, you have a major sonic advantage on most people who mix, because they're just listening to things in a very technical realm, and that doesn't really please. Even a wine mom somewhere wants to be pleased. You don't necessarily want the things that most mainstream music gives to you, because it's designed within the known sphere of hearing range. Once you work outside of the known sphere of hearing range, you're affecting people's emotions in a completely different way, and you're talking to their unconscious.
Right. Will you go a little deeper in that about how that's done, or what does one look for?
Well,
I just want to know more about that.
I think that I'm starting a label right now, and there's a lot of anxieties with sort of going into a business venture, I've never had these particular anxieties, because as an artist, you're hopefully very in touch with what you like. If you're not in touch with what you like, you've got a very serious problem from the outset. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. And you can see this pattern with a lot of mainstream artists, like especially hip hop. Like, you see people come out, get a major, massive single, and then just fade away for the rest of their career. And what you see in their eyes, I think, is that they don't know what they like. They don't know what it is they were supposed to say. And a producer worked with them briefly and they hit some sort of target. But the difference between that and Neil Young is that Neil Young has a massive amount of opinions,
Right.
And so when you're coming from a place in ways, that's what a real punk is, or a real hippie, like somebody who is in touch with the core elements of a movement, who's a spiritual leader, essentially, is somebody who has these ground floor hardcore opinions. And if you're getting into these crafts, if you're getting into expressing yourself at all, and you don't have that connection, you're going to be just flying in the breeze. You're just going to be exploited. You're going to be confused. You're going to be a flash in the pan. And so unknowingly from the very beginning, I think I was trying to ground myself, find a place where I could come from a knowledge base that was my own. It wasn't even a strategy so much as like a protective measure. I wanted to know how to make great music on my own in my bedroom, without leaning on any particular dependency. I didn't even want anybody else in the band. I wanted to be alone, Right. So unknowingly, I created the most dependable, solid atmosphere. So that now when I'm, to partially answer your question, when I'm writing, mixing, sort of producing and doing final mixes or doing artwork, the entire process it's all controlled by me. So that's really ideal. Like, once you even hand off one element to someone who's playing the fucking triangle on your song, or someone who is supposed to do your artwork, you're in grave danger. You're in a lot of trouble. So
potentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're opening. Yeah, there's a lot of metaphors going on here, but you opening yourself into a world of contradictions, and you want to stay focused right down the center and articulate. This is the task of articulation. So you want to bring people something that they can understand.
Well, I feel like this is a very LSD way of thinking about things, because when I think about, you're reminding me of a couple of experiences. Is like, if the acid dissolves anything, it's the things that are not you. Yeah, and it leaves behind like what is you. I remember sitting with somebody on a large amount of LSD once, and they were looking around their apartment, and they were like, what is all this stuff? They had art on the walls, they had books on the shelves. They were like, this doesn't have anything to do with who I am. Like, I don't even know how this stuff got in here. And they had to kind of like start from scratch. But I want to share this Post-it note with you that I keep right here, because this is important. This is hard for me too. I'm sort of lone wolf it quite a bit. It says, moving at the speed of trust. And that's kind of what I have to do, is like, can I really trust this person to play the triangle? You know what I mean? As absurd as that sounds, it's tough to find someone you can trust to play the triangle.
Yeah. It's funny, like the words you just said, me and Duncan talk about this a lot, but the words you just said, that it creates sort of a fire that burns away everything that is unreal and leaves only what is left, is literally the same words that I would say. So what you have there is this evidence that this spiritual teacher teaches everybody these same lessons. I mean,
Either
like,
that or we both read Be Here Now.
well, that scene in Be Here Now is so powerful because I think that other people like us who have sort of sacrificed ourselves to that same fire recognize when his boat dissolves and his jet dissolves and he's just sitting there and he thinks he's going to die. I mean, that is the experience. That is it. And of course, a normal consumer grade attitude is going to associate that with death. And of course we did too in the beginning, you know, but that's the beauty of the consistency of LSD. That's an amazing thing that we can say the same exact thing, have been never talked before, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely truly beautiful, and is also the reason why so many people say that, I guess, the experience is more real than ordinary reality, right? It's like people in ordinary reality can't agree on anything.
Right. That is terrifying. You're kind of getting into another thing I like to think about, is that the come down depression that he talks a lot about. I think it's in that book, but after they tried to just trip forever, you know, and they couldn't do it, and they came back. And
everybody in the audience, raise your hand if you tried to trip forever.
I think that that's one thing I don't hear the earlier hippies talking about, which I wish I heard more of, is the profound heartbreak that they might have felt at the end of like sort of the 70s and into the 80s and Reagan takes over, where you have to admit to yourself, you know, that this paradigm shift didn't really quite take hold in the way you thought it would. And I would love to hear more about someone's personal experience with the depression that really hit, because my mom was one of those people that was there, and my dad too, but my mom hit the ground running and, you know, got the perm and the business suit and like got the good job, and she was listening to 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton. She was kind of like, she made it work. And so in a sense, I think she sort of worked around that upset. I mean, with Reagan and everything like that, every single night she was crying, yelling at the TV. But there was a sense that no one ever really told me about the true letdown of the hope that was installed during the 60s, you know?
Speaking of Das's, have you read Bhagavan Das's book?
You know, I have
he kind of tracks that.
Yeah, I've always wanted to. I used to look for it in the library back when me and Duncan were in college, because he was the one that I was the most drawn to in Be Here Now. And he's kind of like the mysterious one. And he's sort of like a parallel for something like my guru in my podcast. But for some reason I like never found the book for 20 years or something. And when I did finally see it, for some reason that day I saw the cover and I thought to myself, for some reason I didn't want to go there. I don't know why. Maybe it seemed too sad to me. I don't know.
It's really sad. It's hard to read. You know, he sort of unconsciously admits to kind of all kinds of abusive behavior.
Wow.
You know, he treated a lot of people kind of really badly in his sort of spiritual narcissism.
Wow.
That he only recently has started to understand. There was some very public stuff where, you know, he started to get confronted on like his 50 years of bad behavior towards women, people in general. And I think, you know, it started to sink in. But there is his journey of kind of coming home and having some kids to raise, and realizing that the beads and the, you know, and the Ektar weren't going to cut it. And, you know, he started to use his, excuse me, like his cities, you know, the accumulation of his practices to sell cars and encyclopedias.
Wow.
I mean, kind of join the race.
It's interesting though, because there's some sort of tables turning there with Ram Dass, or he's sort of rising up as, you know, the student sort of became maybe the teacher in a way, and there's something beautiful about that, because it means that the idealism, this transcendent point that he's being he's come to believe in because of people like Bhagavan, is like he's his hope has pushed him out of his own kind of sort of spiritual stall out as an early, you know, his earlier form. And then this other guy falls from grace. It's all just, it seems like part of the whole story, the way it needs to go. But it's an amazing thing that somebody who might have had a more like a larger appetite for the idealism pushes through. Like, I think there's a lot of roadblocks along the way, and someone has to have a kind of obsessive need to understand, you know, the final conclusive point, or like why they got into this and where they're going. And if that falters, if they sort of fall off to some sort of lifestyle side plot, then, you know, there's a lot of ways to do that. In fact, that's what the world is. The world is just one big capitalist side plot, you know?
Right.
So,
well, that's like the Holy Mountain, right? You saw the Holy Mountain, right? It's like they're climbing up it, and they get, you know, half of them get distracted on the way up.
Right. Huh. Yeah, I never even thought of it that way. Do you think that's literally what he was displaying? I guess
yeah,
so.
I mean, we want to get to the top of it. There's also a really cool book, I think, called The Initiate, which is you know, another one of these books where we have, you know, our protagonist, and then they have this mystical guru, you know, who kind of tells them what they need to do. And, you know, a band of these people are climbing the mountain, and they don't all make it. You know, and it's very clear that they get distracted by lust and greed and fear and doubt.
Well, that's interesting that, you know, that the guru themselves is so clearly, I mean, this is so cliche, and yet it's so interesting that the guru is clearly the person just kind of handing off the message, which is a message of potentiality. It's not necessarily saying that the guru is going to make it to the top of the mountain at all. The guru probably will not be able to help you get there. So they themselves will get stalled out. Will you get to the top? It's like you don't know until you actually do it. And by then, I don't think you have the ego to feel any pride to bask in, you know?
Right. I mean, even, I think it's yeah, I mean, we're in a lineage, yeah, where nobody can do it for you. You know, it's like there's a lot you can only stand on so many shoulders.
Right.
Before you have to jump off the shoulders and fly. And can you fly or not?
Yeah. But I mean, really, what is the sort of infomercial of society is that you can buy this kind of comfort at the top of the mountain or something like that. But it's hard to say.
Oh, there's glamping at the top of the mountain now.
Well, I mean, even the John Lennons, just like Bhagavan, it's like everybody falls from grace, and falling from grace is probably part of the circular path. You know, it's like, it's just something that maybe needs to be done if there's more work to do. It's just part of the initial plan, you know?
Right. I mean, I guess we have to define grace, and we have to define falling and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it seems that as we sort of cycle up and down, and more weird metaphors, as we cycle up and down the chakras, you know, just kind of looking for vulnerabilities and exploits, and trying to like patch all that stuff up, so that, you know, the system's, I don't know, built to last or something.
Yeah, I mean, to getting involved in like semantics about grace does not sound fun at all, but it is an interesting.
Let's not do it.
Yeah, let's not do it. But it is interesting. I mean, when I was at my happiest time of my life, and I sort of experienced this this year-long sort of high that I never came down from until an eventual situation. It's a very long story, but I had a sort of religious period, and then that period was, I'm saying that very loosely, but it was just a period where I was happy every day, completely happy. Just I was not threatened by anything. It was a place that I don't know I'll ever go back to. So I think that there are peaks up at the top of the mountain that you can experience by personal experience. I think I know what that is, but I'm sitting here now and I'm telling you I'm not necessarily in that place. And
Right.
I don't know why that is. You know, that's not like, it's not something to be worried about or anything, ashamed about, but I think that state of grace, there is something very real. It's just that to describe it to you or to seduce you into believing about it is totally uninteresting to me. It's just, you've either been to this place and maintained it, but it doesn't even matter. It may go away, you know.
It may, well, it probably, well, because we're humans,
Mm-hmm.
we have a complex central nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a complex, body mind complex, and somehow a to-do list has formed.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be my guess that in that place where you were happy all the time, your to-do list was shorter.
Oh man, I didn't have to do anything. And it goes back to Ram Das versus Bhagavan too, the transcendent point of a kind of spiritual goal, like the top of the mountain. If you got to the top of the mountain, and I don't mean to be like freshman in college about this, but like if you got to the top of a mountain, I mean, you do need another top of the mountain. You know what I mean? You still need a transcendent point. You still need some level. That's the way consciousness works, something to work on, like, because you just worked, you just climbed the mountain. The entire myth of Sisyphus, the imagery of it doesn't include anyone basking in a hammock at the top. It's just literally always working. And that's to be human, you know?
Well, I mean, I just can't help but feel like I'm just finding the top of that mountain just kind of resting in my heart right now. So there's like stuff I have to do and things I have to achieve. I'm super anxious about my business as well. But if I do take a moment, I was like, oh, right. There's sort of this lotus flower, this mountain in the middle of it in my heart that's just kind of vibing. And I can maybe take 5 breaths there and then like get back to my insane to-do list.
Yeah. When I say anxieties, I mean, it's just money. And like, I like the number in my bank account is not something that I really think about that often. So yeah, when I say anxieties, it's not anything. I can experience things like getting a parking ticket, and I'm thrust into like levels of anger or like disappointment that have like, they're so much more than the anxiety I'm talking about with the money and in my business.
What was the worst parking ticket you ever got?
Well,
the worst situation?
I had a friend that asked me to send them. I met a friend on the internet, right? They're in Switzerland, and they sent me one of their songs, and it was from the 80s, and they were like trying to show me something about themselves, and they said, "Send me one of your songs." And I was like, I've written 1,500 songs. I don't know, I don't have a favorite, but for some reason I reached for this really sad song, and I don't know why, but it just seemed totally natural, like a natural moment where the singer is not has no agenda at all. They're just sitting there, and for some reason that called to me as like a natural something you should show somebody, because you're not trying to be flashy or anything. And they wrote back and they said, "This is so sad, so sad. And was this a breakup? Like, what caused this song?" And I said, "It was a parking ticket." And they They didn't really believe me. But the thing was, for some reason at that time, you know, I'm sure I had so many problems. I had just moved to New York, and I was in a situation in a relationship, and I think I was just really unhappy in a lot of ways. But that day, getting that parking ticket, it was, as Duncan once said to me, like God, you know, was pointing down through the clouds at me, and as Duncan's words were that God is saying, "You're a terrible, terrible person, or you must be punished," you know. And so when Duncan said that to me, that was when I wrote this song called "Evil Falling Down from the Sky." I was using his imagery, and that actually came from a long night, one of my favorite moments with him, where we were on LSD, and this is 1996, and we were down in my studio, and he came in, and he was having a really, really hard time back then. And he was talking, and I just interrupted him. I said, "What's wrong?" And he was like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, what's wrong?" I just wanted to see what he would say, because we had this moment where we were both tripping, and he was talking about his girlfriend and some drama they were having, but there was something going on with him. And I just thought, this is his chance. What will he say if someone puts him on the spot completely? You know, his mind has to answer this question with no context. And he said, I mean, we're sitting there, it's silent. And he said, "I just feel like God is pointing down through the clouds at me and saying, you're an evil, terrible person." And to this day, I mean, that Duncan carries that with him. In order for Duncan to be happy, I think he has to fight against those voices in his head. And that's one reason why I think I'm pretty impressed with what he's done, because he was so fucked up back then.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of us were, and isn't it, I mean, I'm starting to see more and more people, more and more people are coming to psychedelic medicines, that like, and are calling them things like medicines. It's like in 1996, I wasn't calling it medicine.
Right.
Maybe if my mom caught me or something, I'd be like, "Wait, it's sacred medicine, Mom," but, and, it's really interesting to see how many people, like, deeply hate themselves, have deep, deep judgments about themselves, have decided that it's over. They're already consigned to hell. They're just sort of biding their time before they die, and then they have to go to hell.
Sure.
And, the ability to sort of like look at that when you're young and start to unwind it is huge, and hopefully produces some good results if you don't go mad.
Yeah. I think the transcendent point, for me, having like idols was like actually really good. And I know that doesn't sound like you're supposed to think that's good, but to be totally honest, I mean,
who are your idols?
Well, I mean, a lot of them were in music, and they didn't they didn't turn out to be spiritual leaders on any level, but
Sure.
like, to be honest, with like all of us being in this semi movement, like the reason why we're talking here today is probably because we did see someone else, and we did aspire to something they were doing, and it excited us. And that is a wonderful thing, like seeing someone else on a skateboard go over my head as a 12-year-old, and just, I mean, having them shatter what I thought was possible. That is such an important experience, and like what my point is, that yeah, everybody has those self-loathing frequencies like ringing out pretty loudly all the time, but it's what you do with it. So if I saw that kid flying over my head, and I thought, I mean, you know how many times you have to fall to get to land that? It's like, that level of perseverance is insane. It's actually a kind of obsessive insanity.
Yes.
So like teaching myself all the instruments and production and doing maybe 1,500 songs and many albums and things was definitely a level of mental illness, but funneled into something productive, right? So
Right.
there was a lot of like anger and frustration and sadness that went into making the best things. And I have no reason to want that to not exist, or want to eradicate where that stuff comes from, because the transmutation of those negative feelings, like you said, is just to be human, is our job, is
Right.
to basically, it's alchemy, honestly.
Right. Well, I mean, right. And I think, we do it a disservice, back to semantics, to pathologize it and to be like, oh, it must be mental illness, as opposed to this is actually the human condition.
Right. Right.
If we're talking about sanity being, shoulder pads and bangs and 9 to 5. Right. It's like, or what you even said at the beginning, outside the known,
Right.
of kind of the musical, recording pop hits.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a couple different levels of things in every bit we've talked about, but parallel to me transmuting horrible feelings was also just pain that was like borderline unnecessary. There was a lot of stuff in my head going on that wasn't necessarily very real. And I guess you could argue about like, well, what is real, really? If you're tripping and you see, thousands of soldiers marching at you, what is really real? Is this symbolic of something? I don't know, but there are levels of self-flagellation that didn't deliver me any great knowledge,
Right.
So
I do know.
Yeah, there's a lot of different elements of the thing, and maybe my personality had to undergo a lot of that kind of senseless pain to eventually say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore, to myself. But I can understand why you read books and see movies and hear about musicians and artists who beat themselves to death, or give up or something. It's just so difficult. And there have been moments where I thought things were extremely difficult, but I never thought they were too difficult. There's something about me that believes I'm going to make it through. And I don't know if that's because I had a relatively, a supportive mother. I don't know if it's because I had a pretty good situation growing up, but it seems that if you talk to her, she'll say I came out of the womb just spouting like theories and opinions, like I seem to have been born this way. And so I think that that transcendent point or something is within me, kind of like the hammock you said, it is in your heart or something. It's like there's something in me that just believes I will surmount any hurdle, which is like totally different from my guru or the people around me that inspired me. I can see that they don't believe they're going to make it, and they stopped or compromised the integrity of their original vision,
And so you think that's innate? That wasn't sort of created, that wasn't forged in any kind of fire along the way of your path?
In my world, in my mind, when we went to that place in college, me and Duncan, we took a few hundred hits of acid. Like what I came out of that storm knowing, like Carl Jung says, knowing, not believing in God, but just knowing, is that we are designed. That's what I felt. Like
Mm-hmm.
people debate nurture and nature all the time, but ever since that period of my life, I never had any interest in the debate. I just knew I was designed, you know.
Sure.
That's a humble way and at the time for me to just not take credit for anything that is me. You know, I'm just saying I studied this thing and it's this way, you know. I didn't make this thing. I didn't design this thing, you know. Like my mom said, just came out of the womb as a little freak, you know, and, and
Mm-hmm.
just to say that you're self-designed, to say that you yeah, forge something in a fire yourself, to me almost sounds like if Taylor Swift said to you, listen to my new song, you know, didn't I invent something so wonderful? It's like, you didn't invent anything. Music is not yours. You know, this is you G to A to C to E has nothing to do with you. This is
Mm-hmm.
something we're all using and experiencing together. You know, it's just to take credit for something that is the universe seems bizarre, you know.
Right. So where do you put in things like, the self-improvement movement, people taking psychedelics to sort of tinker with their psychology, their consciousness to sort of improve their lives, improve kind of the way that they view their lives. Where does that fit in with this sort of immutable design?
If 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 what you said was true about like disintegrating the fat, you know, disintegrating all the stuff that's obscuring what's really going on.
It was, by the way, but yeah.
Yeah. Then if that is, you know, a real process that people with really pure intentions are involved in, then I mean that's a wonderful thing. If you are a sculptor or a songwriter or anything, you're trying to get rid of the all the excess like toxins that are just like, you know, being given off during the process. That's just
Mm-hmm.
normal. There's waste, you know. Um, but as when you say tinkering, you know, I mean, there's a consumer culture that's using the reefers and things in a kind of silly way, just like a cookie down at the mini mart, you know. And so that's not something I would want to encourage. That would be like saying, you know, doesn't eating pudding feel great? You know, doesn't it just feel so great? Well, you should eat it all day, every day. You know, that would be silly. And the reason why I think the monks with Ram Dass, why they were instantly worried when he gave them acid. They were like, oh, you guys are just gonna fuck around with peak experience for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? They were worried. They were like, this is kind of gonna be bullshit if you guys sell this as a capitalist, you know, industry. Like you're not gonna find people with the transcendent point. You're gonna find people that just want to play around in the sandbox. And so delineating the seriousness of someone's intent
Mm-hmm.
is pretty important when you get into that.
Right. And especially like playing around in the sandbox of self-hatred,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like the I'm not good enough. God is pointing his finger at me and telling me I'm terrible. And
Right.
I'm going to take psychedelics and really feel that 100% and maybe feel like a little bit better, but I have to come back because there's so much more to do because that's how much of a piece of shit I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, every time a skinhead laces up their, you know, boots, or some guy that like deals meth down on the corner, you know, gets into their ritual, they are
Mm-hmm.
effectively not exploring themselves because they've found a lifestyle that somehow creates a defensive layer as they navigate their social situation, you know. And you can totally be like the cool guy selling nugs outside the fish show when it's just a fucking front. You know what I mean? There's like
Mm-hmm.
there is not there's not a solid way that like acid's going to pull you through this unless you have the right intentions. I mean, it'd just be an absurd thing to suggest that it was going to rebuild your entire brain chemistry, you know?
Right.
I think it's there, like I'm guessing Bhagavan did, like when you look back at your dependence on some of these things you wore during your transformative phase, you know, sometimes you grow to resent some of the transformative devices that you used to lean on, because you're like, oh God, that was such an entry level phase I was in, you know. When I moved back to my hometown, I would turn down my old street and I would try to imagine, or I'd accidentally sort of see my teenage self coming around the corner, as though I'm like turning down my old street and I'd see the kid that I used to be coming down the street, and I just thought, wow, what would I think of that person, you know? And I think I would think they were pretty silly, you know, dangerous, kind of just out of control, just totally out of control. And that's exactly what people said about me. They were like, that person's not going to live for another year. And now that I can, you know, see it from a pretty objective point of view, I can see what they probably thought I was just, I mean, when I was washing dishes, my nickname was fuck waste, you know, like they probably saw someone that was literally going nowhere. But underneath all that, there was still this kid that was initially extremely curious. It's just I went through a phase with drugs where I really became a cliche. You know, I became a silly loser. And once I finally got to college and I met Duncan, I saw someone who was using their mind, like using thinking as almost like an athletic sport. And instead of, you know, skateboarding or doing the things, maybe playing guitar, you know, that I was focusing all my interest on, I just saw Duncan and I thought, I used to be like that. I used to think, and I used to think almost like you were trying to jump hurdles, you know, and in an Olympic sense, you know, and he inspired me. I just thought to myself, I'm going to get serious again, you know, and so I made it through, but like a lot of people get, as we said, you know, sidelined on the mountain, you know.
Right. Or, you know, even do lasting damage where the thinking's not even possible. Yep.
That's totally real. I mean, you see people, you see like a level of alcoholism. And I mean, I've definitely waded out in those oceans, but like you see a level of alcoholism where people's brains aren't functioning quite well anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Like almost just nonsensical hallucination, you know?
Right. And it, you know, that term sort of like wet brained or something.
Oh yeah.
You know, they almost seem, there's a puddliness to them. You know, they've been like a little bit melted.
You've got to, you're tempted to believe that this is fate, you know, that people are designed to go a certain distance with their curiosity. And, you know, as I said before, that's just something that happened to me. I just felt that, you know, okay, this is the design, you know, like if you don't get all the way to the end, you know, like they do in the I guess it's not Piaget, but like in Carl Rogers or I mean pretty much all the developmental psychology, if you get held up in like a rebel phase, you know, if you were just 2 years old saying no, if you get held up, then that's probably your fate. You know, I'm not going to sit around blaming anything on the fact that I didn't have a father. I have no interest in that. I've never had
Mm-hmm.
any interest in that. Someone who does, you have to wonder, like, okay, you must need to believe this for some reason. You know, you must need, because the ceiling, you're alive. The ceiling is not there. You know, you can walk forward up the mountain, but sometimes maybe somebody has to have a script, you know, that's like, actually, I had to stop on this part of the mountain because it's actually like better for me.
Mm-hmm. Like the sun is hitting me just right. You know, this is a good place. This is a good place to set up my shop. I can sell water to the other people on the mountain.
Right.
You're making me think of like that time stream theory. You know, where like time is sort of like a stream. You know, and they use it in time travel movies. They have the theory about traveling back in time. That it's not that, like, you know, if you go back in time and you change one or two things, the stream will, it's like throwing pebbles into the stream, and eventually it'll just keep going where it's going. Like, you really have to dam it up with a lot of rocks before the stream changes, but you can.
Right.
You know, it's like a boulder, you know, it's like a boulder could accidentally land in your time stream and just like, you know, you could make a stupid decision and then you're incarcerated or incapacitated or who knows what.
Yeah.
You know, but for the most part, you know, we're kind of flowing towards the design, like you say.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like, you know, if someone was to tell me that if Kurt Cobain, you know, just hadn't have gotten on the heroin or just hadn't have gotten so famous, he never would have killed himself. I would just be like, how do you know this? You know, like, what? I mean, it's, as far as we know, this is just how it happened. You know, this is what was going to happen as far as we know. But it almost, to that point, it almost feels like some sort of, you're entering a QAnon world of like, you know, well, this, if this hadn't have happened, then this would, it's like this obscure dominoes are falling and your fate is just decided by these bizarre occurrences of, well, a shooting star happened, so he had to stop going up the mountain. It's like, what kind of faith is that? There's no sense in like the strength of human beings and design or the integrity of what we are. You know, that was one of the main things me and Duncan would argue about in 1996 was I was living in a world of chaos. So I said, there's no form, there's no design to this. And he would say, no, there's an intelligence, there's an intelligent design behind all of this. And then I went through my thing and I came out and I said, you were right. And he was like, I don't know if I was right. I just read that in a book. But like, in the end, I think that his religious, you know, calling, the thing that he experienced was essentially that he trusted something. And I trusted nothing, but I came out of it trusting it exactly the way he said, you know?
Right. You know, the interesting thing is, you know, I do think there's an intelligence. You know, on one level, I do think that everything happens for a reason. I think it's important to note that the reason is incomprehensible. You know, I hate when people say, you know, something bad happens to somebody and everybody's like, well, everything happens for a reason.
Sure.
That's like, screw you. You don't know anything.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah, it happened. You know, it's like, as near as I can tell, the reason everything happens is so that we can learn to be nice when it does.
Yeah,
you know,
make
learn
no
to be
mistake.
nicer.
I'm not saying any of this in the way that I'm like, I'm informed with the mission of humanity. It has nothing to do with that, but I do think that's where Sartre really understood freedom of choice, which is an extremely complicated subject, like a subject that I don't know has ever actually even been successfully solved in any way. But Sartre's idea was that, like you said, if something bad happens to you, doesn't matter what the reason is, it's what you do with it. It's your reaction to everything and what you build off of that momentum.
Right.
That's where your character comes into question. That's where your integrity is formed. You know, it's like there's an old, I think it's Shakespeare. It's one of my favorite lines. It says that you can't have integrity if you just are good and you don't know the dangers of being evil. There's
Right,
no,
like Bob Dylan.
yeah, he's
You know,
evil.
to be, well, no, he said, to live outside the law, you must be honest.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important to understand the dark side. You know, I don't think that walking on the right side of the street or something is something that makes you truly good, you know.
Right.
So in the end, I would say that that's probably also pretty pre-designed too. But I don't want to. I don't know your past sort of semantics on the show, but like I hope I don't sound like some sort of uptight Nazi talking about predestination and stuff like that, you know.
I mean, this is, the show goes any number of ways.
Okay.
Often we end up talking about people's art and music a little bit more. This is freaking great though. This is fun. You know, when we're talking about freedom of choice, it makes me think of the Yoga Sutras, right? There's like one of the things that you're supposed to do, one of the niyamas, Ishvara Pranidhana. You know this, right? You know, kind of surrender to God. One of the other definitions, like Ishvara sort of means God. One of the other definitions is the one who chooses. So it's like when you're talking about freedom of choice, you have to decide, well, who is the one who actually is doing the choosing? You know, and that's, you know, comes back to dissolving the parts of you. You know, it's like which of you is holding the wheel? What part of you happens to be holding the wheel at any given time?
Yeah. I have to say, I don't really feel like I never really feel like I'm making decisions, you know, like, and it's haunting. If I really was to go down to the logical conclusion of that feeling, there would be some really intense, disturbing forks in the road there. Like when I'm mixing a song, there's thousands and thousands of decisions being made constantly. I never sit there and think that I really innovated, like I was saying with Taylor Swift or something. I never sit there and think that I'm really like making a choice. I'm just like moving away from things I don't like. That's simple. That's very easy to do. All you have to do is listen, you know, like listening is a bigger part of making music than like learning how to play guitar. It's just knowing where you would like to go, you know. And when you're getting into that, I never feel like I'm like a driver that's like got my hands on the wheel so much as I'm just trying to fix something, you know. Like that's what it really feels like. I'm trying to repair something that occurred, and the thing that occurred was like someone else, you know. I don't sit there basking in it thinking, oh wow, what a good guitar line. And I have no interest in it, you know. It's just I've got to get to the end of this process. That's my addiction. My obsession is to get somewhere, you know, to close this down and make a record. And most of the musicians I know are mostly like they're more stuck in the process, you know. And for me, the process or the trappings of the robe you wear or the, you know, the various like dressings of things are totally uninteresting. I just don't care about that. I just want to make the thing. I want to articulate something. And I think that's luckily a more healthy way of being, because you're just using what's around, you know, almost like an anarchist or some sort of somebody who's not too lost in a particular subculture. You know, you're trying to transcend the process. And if I did teach a class I've been invited to UCLA or various things, but I never really followed through on it. But if I did teach a class, I think I would try to help people leave behind a lot of the bullshit. So I would essentially be their LSD, you know, I would be burning away all the things that are holding them, things they don't need, you know?
Right. That seems like a good way to go. I mean, yeah. We have, you know, as we have about 13 minutes, do you want to talk about some practical things you're involved in? Do you want to like plug a couple of things, talk about the record label that you're building, talk about the class that you might teach at UCLA?
I mean, I've never, Duncan always asked me that. I've never promoted myself really in any official sense. And what would that really do? Like, you know, do people actually sit down and take your Twitter handle and then go like send you $200 and buy your records? I don't know, but
I don't know. You know, the thing is they probably would have by now. You know, if they've listened this far and they like you, they probably they can type Emil Amos into
right
freaking Google bar and find your stuff. It's just that people seem to want to do it.
Yeah, right.
You know, most people kind of,
they're different from me though, because you know, if you're a writer, you may have written for 12 years on a book and you have one book, and you came on this show and you're like, yeah, I've got a book, I want to sell it. But I mean, I've got so many different things, and you, if you look me up or you talk to your friend, they're going to say I'm the drummer of a band, or another person's going to say I do a podcast, or another person's going to say they like the videos I made, or another person's going to say they're a fan of the label. You know, it's like, that's one thing I did that somebody would say was bad, is that I diversified too much back in a day where that wasn't even a word we were using. But like, I didn't see any choice, because I didn't see any success for me and Duncan, like, you know, waiting in the future. So we just had to do what we needed to do, and we needed to do it immediately. And the fact that people found it was pretty lucky. And the fact that we live off of this stuff is insanely lucky. And I'm very aware of that. But you know, I mean, right now I'm working with a label called Thrill Jockey, and we're putting out a bunch of Holy Sons records. We're reissuing ones that sold out. So the new record is called Raw and Disfigured, and you can go check that out.
And some of them are on like colored vinyl.
Yeah, those new ones are all like special repressings, but you
which
know,
might be I just want to say that might be like extraneous stuff that, you know, like, you know, the fact that it's on a swirly vinyl, but there are people like me that kind of get off on that stuff. Like, I like an album as a item, as like an object of art.
Yeah, no, I'm not a snub about that at all. Like, real record collectors supposedly don't like that, and I don't understand that at all. I'm a sucker for beautiful, flashy things too, but you know, my mind is always in what I'm doing next, because I have so many chess pieces that I'm moving that I have to think about. So right now I have to finish so many different things, and every day is a procrastination of something somebody wants. I mean, a lot of people really want me to do the podcast again, and it's very hard for me to explain to them that before I did that podcast, I was a musician. So I have to go finish these records to get back to it. And it's just really hard to explain. Thinks, hey, I'm in Kansas. When is Ohm going to be here next? And I'm like, that's not what I'm doing today, man. Like, that's not, I can't bring Ohm to Kansas tomorrow, you know, but I can give you this podcast. And then someone else will say, yes, I've been waiting 5 years. And, you know, everybody else will say, what's that? I've never heard that. I only like his like sampling project, you know?
The podcast is the outsider thing.
Yeah, well, the Drifter's Sympathy is the name. Outsider, the Outsider is the theme of it, and I think it's an interesting thing. It's what we've been talking about this whole time, in a sense, is that like maybe, hopefully, there was a sense in which I was more comfortable being outside of all these movements. You know, in the podcast, my first guru is like a 34-year-old gay deadhead guy named Ron.
Ron.
Yeah, Ron. He's a legend. And I was like 13, maybe I was 13, and I was straight edge. So like, cause you know, I mean, I'd never really seen drugs at the time. And the beauty of that interchange is that neither of us are geniuses, you know. Ron is a very silly character, and I've reconnected with him recently. But the beauty of that is that somebody can impart something so serious to you and so important to you, but they themselves don't necessarily have to be this beautiful guru that you'd see in a movie. They could be a very silly person, you know. And there's something very comic and beautiful about that, you know.
Yeah, I want you to know I did listen to that, and then I did look up Revenge of the Nerds on IMDb. And I've made my decision about who you were talking about in that episode.
Well, so in order to know what we're talking about right now, you have to dive into Drifter Sympathy, the podcast. But
that's what I'm doing. See, I'm building desire. Plugging your podcast.
I need to come back to the podcast. I've got a lot of work that I did on it, and me and Duncan have even just recorded because he moved back to North Carolina too. So we're working together more often, and then now, if anybody wonders why I keep mentioning Duncan, it's because his name's Duncan Trussell, and I assumed that you knew about him, but I don't know if other people do.
It's interesting to have him in the background. It's almost, some of the stories where you mention him, it reads a little bit like Charlie Murphy True Hollywood Story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we were like, we truly were, can't think of the right word, but we were losers, you know. Like in LA when we moved there, like we must have looked like the last people that anyone would have taken seriously. And that's ostensibly why I left, because it was still 99, you know, when we were living there. And
the Clinton years. Yeah,
people were still really concerned with what kind of car you drove and stuff like that. Like, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm leaving. And he stayed, and he found some way to persevere. And I wonder if you asked him now if he would do that all again. He'd probably say no, because now he sees that place has a level of absurdity that's very hard to penetrate. But and now he's back. We're both back in North Carolina, which we never ever saw happening. But the beauty of that is that through that loserdom and through that outsider sort of take on everything, we were able to find something that even the people inside the machine could somehow relate to and think was sellable. I mean, he's got a Netflix show. Maybe there has been a massive paradigm shift, but to me, it seems like the outsiders have pulled a trick on everybody else, you know?
Well, the fringe, somebody once told me the metaphor of, like, you know, in these strange times, the fringes are being folded into the center.
I mean, that's just a rule of commodification, though. You know, I've been watching this ever since I was born in underground music, essentially. And, you know, my dad was really close with David Crosby, who was definitely somebody who, in some levels, is a total dick, but, like, you know, is like also somebody who was part of that early commodification of dissent. You know, he's the first guy that yells out that Kennedy has been assassinated by several men at I think it was the Monterey Pop Festival. There are things, there's flag posts along the way that were always kind of part of building the world that I'm in, you know. And I think that when you talk about the fringe being commodified, that's something that they figured out back then for sure. Like you have to be careful what product you're actually buying, when you get into this soup. It's a mess, like we're living in a time much advanced from when David Crosby was being bought and sold by the man,
Yeah, I mean, we're even seeing there's conversations in the psychedelic community. They're certifying therapists to become psychedelic assisted therapists. They've never tried anything.
Yeah.
They haven't done any of that. They haven't done any of that work. They've never had that part of their consciousness dissolved, even a little bit. Maybe they've done a little bit of ketamine. And it's a really kind of strange landscape.
Well, that was happening back then. I mean, you had somebody just threw a little feather in their hair and they danced around with a tambourine, and that suddenly there's some sort of hippie spiritual leader. A lot of those people were, probably CIA agents. There was always some sort of penetration into that zone, because the young energy had to be commodified and turned out. And if you look at the internet, there was levels of radicalism about it, and it's been sheep sheared right down some of the same old pathways,
I was in Eugene in the 90s. I was in college, University of Oregon. We had a guy in a leather vest, and he had a Bible in the back of his shirt, and his name was Zeus, and sometimes we called him Biker Jesus, and he would lift the Bible up and sing Christmas carols, and he would get high with us sometimes. And that guy was DEA, and he took down a meth ring.
No way.
Yeah.
That's such a brilliant way to sort of ingratiate himself, is almost act like borderline mentally ill with you guys.
Yeah. Luckily we weren't meth ring kind of kids. That wasn't our deal, but that's kind of what happened.
At some point, did he acknowledge, you're okay, kid? Like, I wasn't going to bust you.
Well, no, he was gone. It happened. He was gone. It's like we never saw him again. And it was only, I maybe got high with him in a graveyard like 3 times,
That'd be amazing if you were like super high 7 years later and turned on the TV and like, whatever, George Bush Jr. was giving him the Medal of Freedom.
I wouldn't even recognize. We'd probably get a haircut or something.
That's so good. Yeah, I wish I had more sort of experiences with actual agents, because I find that stuff so fascinating. My dad was down there in Miami during the whole like Bay of Pigs thing. So I think he's dead now, but I think he probably had just some incredible encounters with some sorts of agents that were penetrating the hippie underground.
We do have to, the tech guys have to roll, so we have to end. I have an event in April that you're welcome to be a part of.
You want to tell me about that later or no?
Well, it's called the Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration Jam. And it's sort of a lighthearted look at, how do we live the truths that we see in our peak states, just the same stuff we've been talking about. But I will tell you more about that later, and I will also tell you about the time that I met Men in Black.
Awesome. Well, why don't you email me, or do you have my contact stuff?
John does, yeah.
Okay, why don't you email me, and I'll be around probably in April, unless I'm recording or something, but just let me know. And that was great. Thanks a lot.
Cool. And maybe, I'll say goodbye to everybody who's watching, and then, we'll take another minute or two on the backstage.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody. This has been Instrumental Breakthroughs, and I really appreciate you guys all listening. I'd like to thank again our guest, Emil Amos, who I believe is going to go get some more coffee, and our co-producers at Deadhead Land and at Livestream Remote. Please check us out at tamintegration.com, instrumentalbreakthroughs.com, deadheadland.com, and livestreamremote.com, and I suppose emilamos.com as well. Thank you so much. We love you. Many blessings.